All right, some bad news. It looks like the sequel to Cyberpunk is going to go woke. Got a couple of articles I want to talk about here that have some pretty dire quotes in them. And also wanted to talk about just Cyberpunk in general and talk about especially the DLC, which you can see here. That's the gameplay footage today. Yeah, it ain't like the original game. I am very late to the party for sure, but it's not my cup of tea, not yet anyway. I haven't finished it. I'm hoping it gets better, but we'll see. Anyway, let's just jump into this and take a look at some interesting things. So, first article comes from IGN. CD Projekt devs want to push the envelope with social issues in Cyberpunk 2077 sequel. So, Cyberpunk 2077 developer CD Projekt Red recently discussed the future of the RPG series and where it still has room to grow in its upcoming sequel, codenamed Project Orion. One hope the studio has for its upcoming sequel is to do a better job of pushing the envelope in its commentary on social issues. During a recent episode of CD Projekt Red's Answer Red podcast, Associate Game Director Powell Sasko underscored how, despite the game's nature of not hand-feeding players answers to prevailing social issues, Cyberpunk 2077 didn't go far enough in its social commentary. I see that we didn't push the envelope far enough in some places. For instance, Sasko said, let's say the homeless crisis. When I look at it, I'm like, we weren't far enough in Cyberpunk 2077. We thought that we were dystopian, but we just touched the surface. And in fact, that quote in particular is very interesting because there's more prevalence of like homeless in Dogtown in this sequel Liberty City than there was in the entire main game. So they've already been pushing this envelope in the DLC, and it's pretty apparent to me that they're starting to go that direction. And it definitely, there's more to it than that in the sequel, and there's more things than just it's woke and therefore it sucks. It sucks because it sucks. There's fundamental problems with this, and we'll get into that later in the video. But let's just continue on here. There's some other very damning quotes that I wanted to read out. So this next one, I think the really cool thing about Cyberpunk and the dystopian future that it has is there's so much relevance to today of mega corporations, of people on the fringes, of people just being exploited, resources, of the wealth gap, of all these things, Hernberg said. I think that 2077 allows us to tell these stories in ways where at the heart of it, there's always relationships and people, but we're in a really broken world, and that we can call out some of these things. So they want to use the social commentary of effectively like the 80s as a jumping off point to commentate on modern era and current social issues. So they're gonna date this sequel hard and fast because the issues we face today are going to be irrelevant down the road because they're not going to handle it the way Pondsmith handled it, which was to create a world around this and to take it to its logical extreme in a way that is satisfying and understandable and cool. And they're gonna fall flat on all of that for sure. So let's just keep going here. I think for me, that's what Cyberpunk is about, exploring those themes, but in a very poignant way. Hernberg continued, I love the world. I think that's what we're going to try to do with Project Orion, really continue to lean into that and continue to say, what is the state of the world today and what does it look like in a couple of years? So they're basically just going to take what we have today and futurify it and cyberpunk it so that's what this world is going to look like. And that's definitely not what Cyberpunk is all about. Big problems there. Anyway, yeah, Phantom Liberty. So there's we gave the game a 9 out of 10, rating Cyberpunk 2077. Phantom Liberty completes an immense turnaround for CD Projekt Red's future RPG, kickstarted with this anime spin-off, Cyberpunk Edgerunners, which was very good, and its latest 2.0 update. So I like the updates, some of the updates they put in, but the main story compared to Phantom Liberty is night and day. And like I said, we'll get into that. But let's just go on to this other article because there's some damning evidence in here too that we wanted to talk about. So this one, Yahoo Tech, Cyberpunk 2077 devs want to make the sequel more authentically American. And this is actually talking about them setting up a studio in Boston to work on this, which is weird in and of itself because if you want to make it more authentic, you shouldn't set it up in Boston. You should be setting up in Washington State, where Mike Pondsmith is, where Talsorian Games is headquartered, which is Kirkland, Washington. If they were really serious about making an authentic Cyberpunk game and not making it authentically American or if you read between the lines, authentically American style woke, then they would have gone to the West Coast. And that's the irony of it, is going to the West Coast to make it less woke, because that's where Pondsmith is, and he would keep it authentic. At least if they listen to him, because it sounds like the original, they didn't listen to him too terribly much, which is unfortunate. And yeah, I don't know. It's going to be bad. Anyway, let's continue on here. So the sequel to 2077 is in development at the CD Projekt Red studios in Boston and Vancouver. The main reason for creating the Boston studio was to let CDPR develop Cyberpunk and The Witcher simultaneously. However, the developers say it will also help them make the game more authentically American. And here's some quotes. "I think Cyberpunk is obviously a uniquely American story," said acting executive producer Dan Hernberg. "It's got a lot of like punk energy, and the tabletop game was written by an American, so it just seems right to do it in America." He and other developers discussed this and more in a recent episode of Answer Red podcast, as GameSpot reported. Going down a little further here, Associate Game Director Paolo Sasco gave the example of Cyberpunk 2077's manhole debacle. While many players might not have noticed, Night City's manhole covers are strangely European for a city in California. Other examples include streetlights, the position of garbage bins, the color of street signs, and the design of curbs. "It doesn't break immersion," said Sasco. "No, it does not. But it's just that little thing that where you're like, well, maybe this wasn't made by people who live here or people who fully understand all of American culture." Now, I want to talk a little bit about that, and we're just going to continue on with this quote here just to kind of continue and wrap it all up. But that's a big indicator for me that they don't know what the heck they're doing. So we'll get into that in a moment. It's not just manholes and street signs with Sasco discussing things like movies and music. I also think that being in America, it allows us to have those cultural touch points with the larger American, kind of influence with Hollywood. He said, "Obviously, Cyberpunk 2077 took place in LA. It didn't." And so there's just kind of all these cultural touch points and things that we can kind of interact with, whether that's from music or story or just different parts of America, that are interesting to explore. So it took place in Night City. Night City is not LA. And the manhole cover thing and the garbage bins and the streetlights and all that is also an interesting point, because we're going to debunk both of those things in just a moment here. So let's just jump right into the lore. Why not? So let's just straight from the Cyberpunk fandom wiki. The Free City of Night City is an autonomous city located in the border between North and South California on the Pacific coast of North America. It is considered a modern multicultural metropolis of the 21st century, overrun by corporations, corruption, organized crime, and gang violence. Night City was established at the head of the Del Coronado Bay in 1994. Founded by Richard Knight, it was originally known as Coronado City before renaming it in 1998. So, halfway between North and South California. It is not LA. It is not San Diego. It's not San Francisco. It is, I looked it up on a map, and it's effectively just a fairly rural piece of California that they placed this city in. They just arbitrarily plonked the city down, which makes sense because this was a big project to make this idealistic, perfect utopian city that, Richard Knight had this idea. And yeah, that's where Night City came from. It's not a pre-existing city that got renamed to Night City. It's not something that exists in our world, at least. I mean, it was called, Coronado City, but yeah, it's not that. So a little further on down here, it's not LA. I want to just skip forward to what I'm looking for here. Yeah, so just a little further down here. Ideally, it would be a capitalist mecca of opportunity. Knight's Dream City was tailor-made for their purpose, and so he provided the design and construction capacities while these corporations lend in their funds. By 1992, Arasaka, EBM, and Petrochem had all signed on with the project, leading to the formation of the Coronado Partnership. So, Arasaka, Japanese company, Petrochem is a U.S. company, and EBM is a European company, Euro Business Machines. So, who's to say that the manhole covers have to be American styled? Maybe it was like a thing that EBM wanted to hire their contractors and bring their guys in and do their thing. And that's why some of it is very Eurocentric, some of it is not. Some of it is very Japanese and some of it is not. So there's a mix. And, you could have just left that alone and said, yeah, well, that was because, EBM wanted the sewer system to be Euro style because they think it's going to be more efficient or whatever. So there could have been easily an in-lore and in-game explanation for that without a problem, and they could have just left it alone. But they didn't. So, and if they had asked Mike Pondsmith, he probably would have said, well, maybe it's an EBM thing. Maybe they wanted it. He probably would have said that. I don't know. But, they didn't ask him, so we'll never know. And that's just unfortunately how it went. So, we're seeing that these guys are very much not in tune with the original Cyberpunk tabletop. They're not in tune with those books. They don't understand the lore. They don't understand the history. And they just basically want to make a modern American commentary and futurify it. Cyberpunk it. Turn it into their little dystopian futuristic city with all the problems that we have today, which is going to be boring. It's going to be uninteresting. It's going to fall on deaf ears, and it's not going to be Cyberpunk. It's going to not feel like the original game. It's not going to feel like the tabletop. It's not going to feel like any of that. And that's unfortunate because I think there was a lot of opportunity in the original game. I think it had a really rough start. Don't get me wrong. It would a real rough launch and had a lot of problems. But in the end, they did make it right. Now, again, Phantom Liberty has its problems. But the original storyline, I like the original storyline, and it made sense, and it worked for, a cyberpunk setting in 2077. Now, we had Cyberpunk 2020, which was the tabletop, which was the RPG, but that was more retro tech than what we have now, and it made sense. There was a logical path from 2020 to 2077. I don't think there's going to be a logical path from this game to the next one. I think they're going to break a lot of things, and I think it's going to be a less amount of time between the two. So it's going to be even more obvious because they're gonna screw it up, plain and simple. So anyway, that's kind of what I think about the sequel, and further evidence of that is actually in the DLC, and we're gonna talk about that right now because, oh boy, it's rough. And actually, we're at a perfect spot for that because there's some stuff in here that was not in the original game. There's some very jarring changes. There's some very jarring alterations. Actually, we're a little too far forward. Let's go back a bit and take a look-see here. Yeah. Here we go. So, in the beginning of this game, and this is early gameplay, you end up fighting this bunch of guys, and this giant robot comes in and basically saves the day. Long story short, it's on your side, and then it's not on your side. I don't want to spoil too much. And you start getting chased by this monstrosity, and it starts, shooting lasers at you and the whole 9 yards. Now, the problem with this is, if you were just supposed to run away from this thing and dodge its attacks and what have you, it wouldn't have been a problem. But it's very jarring because it changes between you're in control of your character and then they take control of your character, and it's all puppeted. So jumping between these things back and forth, it's just very jarring. There's a lot of quick time events, like you have to hit the F key to do stuff, and it's like in the middle of an action scene, and it's all pre-programmed, and it's not good. Not to mention, this thing is completely immune to anything I could throw at it from a technical ability standpoint, which is what I kind of spec'd in, because that's what kind of nerd I am. I guess I roll technical. So all my quick hacks fell on deaf ears, apparently. Even though I tried them, I kept trying, but it just didn't. I had to open the door. And then you go to an animation, and now the thing breaks through, and this is all puppeted. And so, you went from running to that door and opening it and trying to figure out what's going on to being completely puppeted, and now you're like, I think this section you had to hit the forward key, but you weren't in control of the direction, and now it opens up and you're fully in control of your character. It's very jarring. So, and then you run up here and then it takes back over. So all of a sudden now you're being puppeted again. So you're jumping back and forth between controlling your character and then losing control of your character and then having to control your character again. It's not a good way to go. It was not the best approach by any stretch. And with the quick time events in there and all that stuff, I didn't like it at all. It was not the way to go. Then you end up fighting the thing. Like, you actually end up fighting the thing. And again, this is another problem because you see the little yellow targets. You're supposed to hit the yellow targets. Now, I did not spec into guns. I was spec into technical ability. So now I got to shoot these things. And granted, it would be a lot easier if I had, like, some points in gunplay and could do more damage and be more accurate and get more crit hits and whatnot. But no, I didn't do that. I went technical, and technical falls on deaf ears with this freaking thing. So the boss fight for, someone spec'd in quick axe is going to be more difficult than for someone that was spec'd in guns. It would be a lot more difficult for someone spec'd in melee than guns, because you're getting slammed around by this thing if you're going in melee range. I mean, you can see that right there. So yeah, it was very one-sided in my opinion. But that said, I mean, I finally got him, and it did take a little while longer than I would have expected, but it is what it is. And that's the problem with this game, is that they aren't thinking about how the original game was architected, even in the boss fight, in this boss fight here. And boss fights in general weren't really a big part of Cyberpunk. Yeah, in the end there. But the original story, it was a lot of missions. It was a lot of stuff that you were very much in control of, and this doesn't seem very controlled. This seems very linear. There's just not a lot to do, and now that I'm out of this and into the actual missions, even in that open world setting, it seems much more linear than the original storyline, because you had all those side missions and all those side characters that you were interacting with while you were going through the story, and it made it a richer experience because you had all those side missions. There's very little of that, at least now. Hopefully it'll get better. I mean, I'm hoping. I don't know. I mean, I'm showing up to this party very late. I'm sure everybody that was going to play it has already played it, but here I am. However many months later, I finally have time to sit down and play it. So, I'm going through it on my own, and trying not to get it spoiled, because I don't want to go to a guide to figure this stuff out. I'm just kind of working through it myself, and it is certainly a lot easier than the original story, I think, because there were some things that you almost needed a guide for in certain situations, like you weren't sure how to complete a mission. But this seems fairly straightforward and not very difficult. I mean, I'm not, with the exception of this boss fight, I'm not dying as much as I thought I should be, and needing to get better to go to that next level, to get to that next mission. It's all very straightforward, and I'm not a high level character either. I mean, I did this midway through a replay of the original missions. I just jumped into it, so I'm not like uber powerful, too powerful for the expansion. I'm actually probably supposedly underpowered for this, because I'm not at an end game level. I'm not even close. And yet I'm, not really struggling as much as I thought I would be. So anyway, I think this is an indicator of what's to come. I think this is kind of, between the original stories and this story, is going to be as big of a jump between this and now the sequel. I think it's just going to keep going down and down, further downhill, as time goes on, and I'm afraid to see what's going to come out, because if they're talking about all these woke talking points and trying to make it for modern audiences to be a modern social commentary, like they were saying, I don't know how you fit that in with a fun Cyberpunk game. I know how you fit that in with a boring Cyberpunk game, but not a fun one. So that's what I got for you guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you like these kind of things, give it a like, and I will talk to you later.